this morning, I'm speaking about 1 John 14 that says, "Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced his love." So what does that mean? Because I asked you last week to read the first letter of John, 1 John. Has anybody done that? Great, somebody did. Because you can't understand what I'm talking about unless you have read this whole letter. But let's just go and look at what goes straight before that in 1 John chapter 4. It says from verse, what shall we do? Verse 16. "We know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. So we will not be afraid on the day of judgment, but we can face him with confidence, because we live like Jesus here in this world. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced his fear. We love each other because he loved us first." Now, as you know, as I said last week, this is the New Living Translation. I've read the same verse and the same chapter in all other translations that I have. It all says the same. It says it may be in slightly different wording, but it all comes down to the same. If you live in God's love, there is no room for fear. It is expelled. Now, what love is that? That, what it speaks about here, is the agape love of God. What is the agape love? That is the love that seeks to give. You get it without merit, so you haven't deserved it, you haven't earned it, God just gives it to you. And when does that love come to you? I tell you when. When you come to God, and you surrender your life to him, that love is shed abroad, very old translation, is shed abroad in your heart. It is given, it is poured into your heart. That is the love of God. Now, some people think, well, sorry, but that can't have been for me because I've done this, that, and the other. That's the whole thing. It is love that you can't deserve. It is love that you can't earn. It is love of God. It comes. He gives it to you because it is love that seeks to give. He wants to give it. What do we need to do to receive that? Let's have a look. So Romans 5 verse 8 says, "God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners." So we didn't have to clean up our act first and become perfect people before we actually could receive God's love. Christ died before anything happened. Christ died while we were still sinners, we were still living in the world, not dedicating our life to God. He died for us to make a way for us to come to the Father. It's like he laid down his life over that enormous gap between the world and God himself. And we can walk over that gap over the cross. Christ's death made that way for us. And then we receive God's love, because God's love seeks to give. 1 John 4 verse 8 says, "But anyone who does not love doesn't know God, for God is love." 1 John 4:16 says, "God is love." I just read that. "And all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them." 1 Peter 1:16 says, "For the scriptures say, you must be holy, for I am holy." That's God speaking here. John 4:24 says, "For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." 1 John 1:15 says, "This is the message we heard from Jesus and now declare to you, God is light, and there is no darkness in him at all." Hebrews 12:29 says, "For our God is a consuming fire." These are all attributes of God. That is love, holiness, spirit, light, and consuming fire. We don't like to think about that one, but it can be a very positive thing. Now, it doesn't say, so these attributes of God that are recorded in the world, they are irreversible. You cannot change that, because God does not change. God is who he is. He is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. God does not change. So the attributes of God do not change. He is forever love, holiness, spirit, light, and a consuming fire. You can't say, turn that around. I mean, I talk about being irreversible. You can't say love is God, can you? Because that would mean that God came forth out of love. No. God is love. Not love is God. God is love. Because God was from before time. Because when we look at Exodus 3 verse 14, remember Moses was instructed and to speak to Pharaoh, and Moses asked God, "But what's your name? Because I can't come as myself. I have to have somebody who sent me." He was a little bit apprehensive there. Just to make things more clear to the ones that I'm going to speak about, who are you? And I must have your name. And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. Say to the people of Israel, I am sent you." So God is. God is. He is who he is. He cannot change himself. We cannot change him. God is. God is self-sufficient. He is self-existent. He is all-encompassing and without limitations. He is the one being in the universe who is not dependent on anything or anyone for his existence. He is. That is very hard for us to understand, isn't it? To me it is. It's the same as living without time in heaven. No idea what that will mean, because the clock is very important to me, and if the clock stops, I am like, well, oh, where do I look? Telephone, maybe? Yes. So that's one of those things. I can't fathom what that is. To have a Father who is so all-encompassing that everything and anything doesn't mean anything to him, because he is. He is. we have a tendency to look, let's be honest, to look at others for maybe for a bit of confirmation. We listen to other people's opinions because we want to know if that possibly could be the same as ours, and if not, yes. So we are like we are. We are looking for people who think the same and who have the same aspirations, because then we egg each other on and we have the idea that that is very good for us. But God doesn't need that. He is who he is. He is independent of everything. So love, the agape love, is the essence of God's being. It does not only indicate love that seeks to give, it also, as the word says, love that seeks to give, it looks for action. So the love of God is not static, it moves, it does things. So what has God done? He has created, he rules the world, and he's going, the judge at the end of everything, he's going to judge. So what do all God's activities come from? What is it all based on? On his love. So God creates in love, he rules in love, and he judges in love. So the word of 1 John 4:18 says, such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment. Wow. Do we fear the punishment of God? Do we fear the final judgment? John 16:7-11 says, in fact, it is Jesus' words, in fact, it is best for you that I go away, because if I don't, the advocate or the comforter or the encourager or the counselor won't come. If I do go away, I will send him to you, and when he comes, he will convict the world of its sin, of God's righteousness, and of the coming judgment. The world's sin is that it refuses to believe in me, the Messiah. Righteousness is available because I go to the Father and you will see me no more. So when Jesus went up to heaven, the righteousness of God came down in all who believed in Christ. That was an exchange. It's amazing to understand, hey? And judgment will come because the ruler of this world has already been judged. Because remember, Jesus went down to hell and he came out victorious. So do believers have to fear the last judgment? Romans 5:1-5 says, therefore, we have been made right in God's sight by faith. We have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us. Because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand, and we confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory. We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. For we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with love, the love of God. The thing is, have you received it? Have you received it? And I don't mean, have you received it? Did you get a touch of God's love? I'm quite sure we all did at the day that we surrender to God, we all experience God's love. But do you realize that he keeps pouring it into us? He keeps pouring his love into us. Now, why does he do that? Because remember in the Old Testament, the story of the potter and the clay that was in Jeremiah. And we are called, we as people, because that is a parable basically. The potter is God, he forms us. We are called a vessel or a jar. Now, what are vessels or jars used for? They get filled up and then they get poured out. So what are you doing with God's love? Are you sitting on it? I tell you what, it goes very stale if you keep on sitting on it. If you keep on giving it out to others, it keeps on being renewed and renewed and renewed. And you keep on giving. In that way, you become a living testimony to who God is. In 1 Kings 17, we have the story of Elijah, who was told by God to drink from a brook and was fed bread and meat by ravens in a period of drought. And then God told him to go and see a widow who was to provide for him. But when he came there, she only had a little flour and oil and said, well, that's actually my last meal. And then for my son and myself, and then that's it. We'll die from hunger. And Elijah said, well, if you share this with me, then God will provide. And she did. And what happened? That oil and that flour was replaced day after day after day until the rain came again. And so she never ran out. And the same is with the love of God. If we keep pouring it out to others, God keeps pouring it in, and it will fill. The more you give out, the more you receive. It will fill every little nook and cranny in your life. It will fill all those places that you have kept slightly away from God, because my place, thank you. And God says, I want all of you. Now, the more you give out, the more you receive. Not only in the natural, but also in the spiritual. God will give you more and more. And that is receiving the love of God day after day after day by giving it out. Giving it out. Keep on giving it out. And God will keep on pouring it in abundance. So, are our hearts wide open to give and to receive? God gave the first portion, just as he acted first, and he gave his own son. We always talk about the sacrifice of Jesus, don't we? And you think about it. But have you ever thought about God's heart in this matter? Must have shattered. Yeah. So, how much do you give out so you can give more, receive more from God? And then we go to Matthew 22, verse 37, where Jesus says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the greatest commandment. And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. So that is 3 people you have to love. God, yourself, and your neighbor. But you say, well, it mentions the neighbor here as the second one. Actually, it says love your neighbor as yourself. So you first have to love yourself before you can love your neighbor. If you don't love yourself, how can you ever love somebody else? Because you compare people to yourself, don't you? Unfortunately, we do. We keep on comparing. So, We must, and also another thing is, if we don't love ourselves, don't we make God out to be a liar? Because God says you're perfect in my sight. Hello. Am I perfect? No. No. This morning, Maarten put up a worship tape, or whatever you call it nowadays. And there was one sentence that stood out to me that was, "Let my life be a worship song to you." Now, that is what God requires, that our whole lives is dedicated to worship of God. Now, how many times go we off tune and sing the wrong notes, don't we? So often, it's not funny anymore. And God keeps on being gracious and have mercy with us. He keeps on giving his love to us because he looks at the intention of our hearts. Do we want to be good for God? Do we want to be pleasing to God? Do we want our thoughts to be the right thoughts, the thoughts that please God? That is the desire of our heart. But old habits die hard. I know. That's why we have a fairly long life to work on that. Now there's another part in Romans 5 that I want to read to you, because there's one word in there that stands out for me. Romans 5, 6-11 says, "When we were utterly helpless, Christ came just at the right time and died for us sinners." So it establishes again that we were sinners when Christ died. We hadn't cleaned up our lives. No, we were still the old people, spiritually speaking. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, or perhaps someone might be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. For since our friendship with God was restored, keep that word in your mind. Our relationship with God was restored by the death of Jesus while we were still his enemies. So we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son. And now we can rejoice in a wonderful new relationship with God, because our Lord Jesus has made us friends with God. That's the words, isn't it? Wonderful. So then you think about all the relationships that you have had and the relationship that you right now have. And you think about the kinks that we have in relationships with others. We think about how in families relationships go wrong. Our friendships that we thought were lifelong, they just, different opinions, people get in a huff and everything goes wrong. So what do we do about that? What do we do about that, our relationships? Well, God is in the restoration business. God restores. He restores people to himself, but he also can restore relationships. So if you have broken relationships, whether it is in families or whether it is with friends or whatever, start praying. Start praying. Start asking God to bless those people and to restore not only the relationship between you and that person, but also the relationship between you and that person and God. Make it a triangle. Because we have been, over the last years, I see it time and again how young people and older people start saying, well, if my parents hadn't done that and that, I wouldn't be who I am. And they start pointing the finger at the parents for things they perceive that the parents have done wrong. Now, think about the parents. Who did they have as an example? Who was the example? What have they ever learned? Because remember, as children, we follow a physical example. Words don't mean very much. So kids look at your behavior and they copy it. Now, we all know that children are wonderful observers, but very poor interpreters because they don't know backgrounds and all that. And I know from personal experience that your environment and the culture that you live in and all those things, what you teach, what you hear on a daily basis, forms your belief system, the way you act, the way you develop. So it's not always godly, definitely not. But we can't blame our parents, because there comes a time, and in the Jewish culture, it is 12, 13 years old, that you become responsible for your own decisions. So let's take ownership of our own habits and our own way of life and clear it up before God without blaming other people. Because, tell you what, parents, they never get a manual. And every one of their children is different. And they all develop in a different way and have different needs. And sometimes you think, wow, looking back, they're both in their 40s now. I never knew that. You are different. It's like, wow. Oh, shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have said that, blast. But I did, because I didn't know any better. I just acted according to the understanding I had at that particular time. Yeah. But it's funny to see how your kids develop and become their own person. So anyway, parents, do the best you can. Ask God to guide you. Parents, don't be burdened with guilt feelings, because we all do the things we think are right. So if I had known 40 years ago what I know now, I would have taught them differently. But I didn't, because I didn't know. And thank God, they grew in wisdom, in godly wisdom, so that's good. But all in all, coming back to what we spoke about, the love of God, the agape love, has no fear, because perfect fear, we'll do that again, sorry. God's love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. So if we keep on receiving the love of God, keep on receiving it and keep on giving it out to others, there is no room for fear, because the more we give out, the more the love of God will fill us up to completion. We become mature in God's love. But we need to give it out. There's no way we can sit on it and keep it to ourselves, because stale love is the same as stale whatever. It becomes inedible and unusable. It stinks. So let's not do that. Let's keep on giving it out and receiving more and more from God, and in that way become living sacrifices, so that other people can see that God is love, because we are his hand and his feet. May God bless you. May his love be poured out in your heart daily, and may you give it out on a daily basis to others. May he bless you and keep you, and may your love be a true representation of who God is in your circles. Amen.